Secret Letter in the Old Wardrobe. Chapter 1. Inheritance and the Apartment. When my grandmother passed away, it felt as if the ground beneath me had shifted. She had been the quiet pillar of our family, the one who never raised her voice, who always remembered everyone's birthdays, and who somehow made a tiny two-room apartment feel like the warmest, safest place on earth. And I hadn't spent much time there in recent years. Life had carried me elsewhere. Work, friends, endless responsibilities. But as a child, that apartment was my universe. I remember sitting on the balcony on warm summer evenings, listening to the distant hum of trams rattling along the tracks. The scent of her baking would drift out through the window, mixing with the smell of blooming lilacs from the courtyard. Now, stepping back into it after the funeral, the silence pressed against me like a heavy blanket. Clocks still ticked, curtains still fluttered, but the heart of the home was gone. And lawyer had explained everything in dry, official terms. You are the sole heir. The property is now yours. Papers were signed, documents stamped. But in my mind, I couldn't shake the thought. How could this little place, this nest of memories, ever truly belong to me? And I stood in the hallway that first evening, the key cold in my hand, just staring. The apartment smelled exactly the same as when I was a child. Lavender sachets tucked into drawers, a faint trace of her rose soap, and something more subtle, like the scent of old paper and dust, the perfume of time itself. Furniture hadn't changed in decades. The round table in the kitchen still had its white lace cloth, carefully protected under a layer of clear plastic. The china teapot, with a tiny chip on the spout, rested on the counter, as if waiting for her to return. Even her slippers were by the bed, neatly aligned. And I told myself I had to be practical. There was so much to do. Clothes to pack, things to sort, decisions to make. But practicality was impossible. Every object carried a memory. A porcelain figurine reminded me of the day I accidentally broke its twin and cried for hours until my grandmother comforted me. An old scarf smelled of her perfume, and when I held it, I almost expected her to walk into the room. Hardest part was the bedroom. It was both intimate and sacred, filled with the secrets of a life I had only glimpsed from the outside. On the dresser lay her silver hairbrush, strands of white still caught in the bristles. A framed photograph of my grandfather stood by the bed, his serious eyes watching me as though judging my every move. NTHAT photograph had always fascinated me. My grandfather died long before I was born, and I only knew him through stories. To my mother, he was a noble, hard-working man, respected by neighbors and loved by his family. To my grandmother, he was everything: her partner, her companion, her quiet protector. At least that was the story she chose to tell. Centerpiece of the room, however, was the wardrobe. It dominated the wall opposite the bed, massive and dark, carved from oak so solid it seemed immovable. Its doors reached almost to the ceiling, decorated with patterns of leaves and vines. As a child, I would crawl inside and pretend it was a castle or a cave. My grandmother always laughed, but never scolded me. "It's just an old wardrobe," she would say, but to me, it was a mysterious portal. Now, as an adult standing before it, I felt the same pull. The wardrobe seemed to hold its breath, waiting for me to open it. Not yet, though. I wasn't ready. Over the next few days, I lived between two worlds, sorting through her belongings and drifting in memories. Each drawer revealed something new: a bundle of letters from her sister, carefully tied with string, embroidered napkins made by a young woman long ago, photographs of people I didn't recognize, their faces faded to sepia tones. Neighbors stopped by with condolences, sharing small stories about her kindness. One woman told me about how my grandmother brought soup to those who were ill during winter. Another recalled her quiet singing while watering plants, a gentle melody drifting through the building. Yet beneath those warm recollections, a whisper lingered, a shadow. It felt as if the apartment itself craved to share a story, but I wasn't ready to hear it. One evening, exhaustion pulled me to the kitchen table, where I sat with a cup of tea. Around me were familiar walls covered in faded wallpaper, patterned with tiny roses, and a clock ticking a little too loudly. My eyes kept drifting toward the closed wardrobe door in the bedroom, visible through the half-open door, and a strange feeling crept over me. Inside that wardrobe, behind coats and scarves, beneath layers of wood and dust, something waited. something hidden, patient and silent for decades. In that moment, I realized that inheriting this apartment meant more than taking possession of walls and furniture. Not deeper inheritance awaited, one of truth, and that truth was waiting inside the wardrobe. Chapter 2: Wardrobe and the Discovery. Wardrobe had always loomed in my grandmother's bedroom like a silent guardian. Its polished oak doors reflected the faint glow of the bedside lamp, and the carved leaves seemed almost alive, curling and twisting as if hiding secrets within their wooden veins. And on the third day of clearing the apartment, I finally stood before it with determination. My grandmother's clothes filled most of it, neatly hung dresses, coats she had kept for decades, scarves folded with impossible precision. She had been meticulous, always. Even her old winter boots were lined up perfectly at the bottom. I pulled the doors wide open, and the scent of cedar and mothballs drifted out. For a moment I was a child again, hiding inside the dark space, my small hands brushing against heavy coats as I pretended to be in another world. The memory made me smile, but then the silence pressed in again, and I began taking out the clothes one by one, folding them carefully. Some I set aside for charity, some I decided to keep. It felt almost sacrilegious to disturb the order she had left, but I reminded myself that this was part of letting go. When wardrobe was nearly empty, I noticed something odd. The back panel seemed uneven. At first, I thought it was just warped with age, but as I ran my fingers along the edge, I felt a gap. Narrow, but definitely there, and my heart quickened. I pushed gently, and the wooden panel shifted with a soft creak. It wasn't fixed tightly. Something slipped and fluttered down to the floor. I bent down and saw it, a thin envelope yellowed with time, tied with a faded blue ribbon. My breath caught. It looked untouched, preserved, as though waiting for me. With trembling hands, I picked it up. Dust clung to the edges, and the paper was fragile, as if it might crumble under my fingers. On the front was handwriting I recognized from old postcards and photographs. My grandfather's, strong, deliberate strokes, unmistakable, and beneath it, a sentence that made my chest tighten. To be read only when the truth no longer matters. And I sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the envelope. My fingers itched to open it, but my mind hesitated. What truth? Why had he hidden it? Why would he choose for it to be read only after his death? The room felt colder. The ticking of the clock on the wall grew louder, echoing like a heartbeat. I thought of my grandmother. Did she know about this letter? Had she ever found it? Or had she left it untouched, silently protecting a secret she didn't want uncovered? And I untied the ribbon slowly, almost reverently, and unfolded the brittle paper inside. The ink had faded to brown, but the words were clear. A letter. My dearest love, NIF, you are reading this. It means I am gone, and with me, the chance to explain myself in person. Forgive the cowardice of a man who could not speak the truth while he lived. Perhaps I feared what it might do to you. Perhaps I feared what it might do to our family. NBUT. I cannot leave this world with the weight of silence. Before I married your grandmother, my heart belonged to another. Her name was Elena. She was the fire in my life, the sun that warmed my coldest days. With her, I felt alive in ways I never thought possible. But we were young, and the world was against us. Our families disapproved, society would never have accepted it, and in the end, I chose the path of duty. I married the woman who was good and kind, the woman my family approved of. I married your grandmother, NBUT Elena. She bore my child, a son. I never held him as a father should. I never taught him to walk, never carried him on my shoulders. I watched from a distance, aching with every step of his life. Your grandmother never knew the whole truth, though perhaps she guessed. She was wise in ways I could never be. I loved her, yes, but in a different way. She gave me stability, a home, a family. Yet part of me lived always in another house, another life, one I could never claim. NIF, you are reading this. I ask only for understanding. I was a man torn between two worlds. My loyalty stayed with my family, but my heart remained with Elena. Forgive me if you can. I finished the letter and sat frozen, my eyes blurring with tears I hadn't realized were falling. The words shook everything I thought I knew about my family. NMY grandfather. This man, who had been described as honorable, devoted, steady, had carried another life in his heart. A secret child. A hidden love. Questions rushed through me like a flood. Who was Elena? What happened to her? What about the son? Did he grow up never knowing his true father? Did he still live, perhaps even nearby, unaware of the blood connection between us? And I read the letter again and again, as if the words might change, as if I had misread them. But they remained the same, etched into the fragile paper, undeniable. An apartment, once warm and familiar, now felt charged with mystery. Every corner seemed to hold whispers. Had my grandmother found this letter and chosen to keep it hidden? Or had it truly remained untouched until now? I placed the letter back in its envelope, my hands trembling. The blue ribbon slipped to the floor, and I left it there, staring at it like a fallen thread unraveling a tapestry. NFOR the rest of the night. I couldn't sleep. I lay in my grandmother's bed, staring at the wardrobe, the shadows stretching across its surface. The words of my grandfather's confession echoed in my head. A son, a son, a son. It was more than just a secret. It was a fracture in the foundation of our family, a hidden branch of the tree I had never known existed. And deep inside me something shifted. I knew I couldn't ignore it. Truth, once uncovered, demands to be followed. Chapter 3. A letter, NTO. Be read only when the truth no longer matters. NMY dearest. NIF. These pages have found you. Time has already done what I could not. Make room for truth. And I have rewritten this letter a dozen times, then hid it, then retrieved it, then hid it again. The first drafts were confessions. The later ones were apologies. This one is a story, because only a story can hold the contradiction of what I became. A faithful husband who loved another woman, a father who never called himself one, a man who split his heart neatly in two and then pretended to live with half. And I beg your patience for the length. Some sins cannot be explained without their seasons. Spring, 1951. Reading room. And I met her the way people meet in quiet places. By accident, and then again, and again, until accident looks like fate. City library smelled of dust and paper and the damp wool of coats drying near the radiator. I went there after work to escape the noise of the workshop, the clank of iron and the steady rhythm of the press, and to rest my ears in the hush of pages turning. The first day I noticed her because she didn't notice me. She sat near the window, scribbling notes on scraps of paper, a strand of dark hair lodged in the corner of her mouth until she tucked it behind her ear with fingers inked blue. When she signed the register, I read her name, Elena. NSHE had a way of listening to silence, as if she could hear the second hand of the big clock inhale before it exhaled the next tick. I pretended to read, but I watched the arc of her pencil, the tilt of her head, the tiny crease between her brows when a sentence resisted her. And a third time I saw her, a chair squealed and everyone glared at the offender. She smiled at me then, a quick conspiratorial smile, as if we shared ownership of the small scandal. I smiled back, and the library changed color. NWE spoke in the corridor, where the linoleum bubbled under decades of footsteps. She studied literature. I pretended to understand poetry. She laughed, bright, not cruel, and said, "Understanding is not required. Willingness is." And I was willing. God help me. I was willing for the rest of my life. And I. Summers on the embankment NWE walked along the river in the long evenings, when the paving stones exhaled their heat and the sky, reluctant to end the day, kept a pale band of light over the water. She told me stories about the people she saw on tram rides, invented lives for them, gave them names and problems and heroic flaws. I told her about machines, how even the ugliest device could be elegant if it solved a problem well. She said that was also how love worked. NWE invented rituals. Bread from a bakery that wrapped loaves in brown paper too thin to contain their warmth. Sharing the first apricots of the season on a bench, the juice running down our wrists. A superstition. If we counted 7 cats on the way to the river, the evening would be lucky. We cheated often. NSHE wore a blue ribbon in her hair, not for fashion but for memory. Her mother had worn the same when she was a girl. Once I stole the ribbon and tied it around my wrist. She laughed and said I looked ridiculous. I kept it, folded, in my pocket for months. The world around us was full of rules. Our fathers had rules. Our neighborhoods had rules. Our times had rules. But we made a small country of 2, where the only law was that if she said my name, I would answer, and if I called hers, she would turn. 3. A knock that changes everything. You know already the outline of what comes next, because the outline is common. 2 families who approve of what is sensible, and 2 young people who are not. Nelena's father thought me respectable but too ordinary. Her mother thought me ordinary but not respectable. In my house, my mother liked Elena's eyes, which meant she liked everything else. But my father didn't like the way she argued a woman shouldn't fence with words, and feared we would both drown in dreams. And then there were other pressures. Papers, committees, the unspoken calculus of who marries whom to move which lever. I had a promotion on the horizon, and the foreman, eager to tether me, began introducing me at dinners to a quiet, kind woman with careful hands and a patient smile. She is the woman I would later marry. She is the woman you grew up calling grandmother. She deserved a husband made of one piece, not the patchwork of me. There was a night when Elena and I considered running. She had a suitcase that belonged to her aunt. I had a watch my father gave me the day I started work. We opened the suitcase and put nothing into it. We watched the watch and decided not to waste its time. We closed the suitcase. We folded the blue ribbon. If I ask you to choose me, she said, you will. But you will resent me every morning. If I ask you to let me go, I said you will. But you will resent yourself every night. NWE did not choose. Or rather, we allowed the world to choose for us. This is the same as choosing, but it has the advantage of letting you pretend it isn't an IV. Winter without a calendar, NWE tried to become strangers. It didn't work. We tried to be friends. It almost worked, which was worse. NWE met less often, in daylight, in public parks, in the same library that had first introduced us. We spoke around the dangerous parts of our lives, like children stepping around a puddle in Sunday shoes. When we laughed, we felt like thieves. Then, one snow-slanted afternoon, she told me she felt ill in the mornings. I said it was the winter. I said it was the bread. I said it was the smoke. She said my name in a way that made those explanations irrelevant. There are moments when a life splits cleanly. The day she told me she was with child, I felt the axe cleave. Now ask clumsy questions. How sure? What will we? NSHE answered with a look that gently quieted questions and made room for courage. I will have this child, she said. I don't know how to make that sentence softer, so I won't. And I have wondered since then if bravery is simply the refusal to bend words. NV. House of borrowed time. I found a small room for her on a street with too many pigeons and a courtyard that smelled of soup in the evenings. The landlady had a kindness that tried to hide behind sarcasm. No parties, she said, and if you must cry, do it loudly so I can feel superior to you. Elena kissed the woman's cheek. We were indebted from that moment on, and I brought oranges when oranges could be found. I brought milk in jars when milk could be spared. I brought silence most of all, because silence was safer than plans. NWE did arithmetic on the future. If I left, I would lose my post, which meant losing my ration, which meant losing the ability to keep them fed. If I stayed, I would keep a shape that looked like stability. A cruel equation, and yet an equation. NWE read aloud in the evenings to convince ourselves we were characters with plot armor. She would fall asleep with her hand on her stomach and her mouth forming the last word of a sentence. I would watch her breathing until mine matched it. If this sounds like peace, know that peace often wears the clothes of resignation. NVI. The day he arrived, NHE, was born during a thunderstorm that lost interest halfway through and became rain. The midwife had hands like dry leaves and eyes that were kind and impatient at once. Men are useless at this part, she told me, but you are permitted to try. And I tried. I counted breaths. I pressed a cold cloth to a forehead that burned. I prayed into a room that had no saints in it. When he cried, the world earned the right to keep turning. Elena laughed and sobbed in the same breath. Andrew, she said, let his name be Andrew. We had kept a list, but I knew she had decided long before writing it. I nodded, as if I had a vote. NHE was small, imperious, and perfect. He clutched my finger as if dragging me through a door. I let myself imagine a week, then a year, then a life. Then I folded the imagination like linen and put it away. NWE did not tell my family. We told few people anything. Secrets have a hunger. They want to grow. We starved this one as long as we could. 7. A bargain. Promotions had arrived, and with them attention. My foreman, eager to fix the future, invited me to dinner again, and I went, because men who provide are forgiven more sins than men who do not. The woman with careful hands sat opposite me. She passed me the salt and a piece I did not deserve. I thought of Elena boiling water for tea in a room the size of a hallway. I thought of Andrew's breath fogging the window. I said yes when a better man would have said, wait. And I told Elena the next day. The room shrank. She listened without interrupting, then sat very straight and asked only practical questions. When? Where? Will you be near? Can we remain? And I thought she would ask me to choose, and she did not. That mercy is the heaviest weight I have ever carried. NWE made a bargain that had no language in it. I would be present from a distance. I would send what I could, more often than what I could said I should. I would walk on the far side of the street when I saw them, so I could say I had not. If I passed Andrew and he looked at me, I would not look back. If he needed a coat, one would appear on a hook by the door the next day with a note from a friend of his mother. Cowardice can be remarkably organized. NVIII. Seasons of a boy I did not raise. NHE. Learned to walk with a pirate's swagger, furious at gravity. He threw his ball at the wall and laughed when it returned as if it had missed him. He mispronounced the word for tram and invented his own. Elena wrote me letters I did not keep because keeping them would have made them real. I memorized them instead. He says ram ram. She wrote once, and bows to driver like an emperor. When he broke his arm falling from a low tree that had never broken anyone before, I heard about it the way men in my situation hear about such things. From a neighbor who had a cousin who knew a woman who sometimes helped a girl who lived. The city is a web, and pity moves swiftly through it. I sent money inside a book wrapped in brown paper and convinced myself this was an act of love. There were days when I followed them at a distance, the way a shadow follows a body. I saw him stop to salute a cat. I saw Elena choose the bruised apples because the unbruised ones were priced for prettier lives. I watched the shape of my son's head and could not find my father's nose in it and took this as a mercy. Once, I tell you this because I have no right to hide the worst. He lost a toy soldier near the fountain in the square. He cried with the fury of a general defeated. I found the soldier and almost ran to him. I almost said, "Here, son." I almost announced the truth to stone and sky. Instead, I placed the soldier on the fountain's edge, then walked away and waited until he found it and believed in miracles. This is what I did. I outsourced miracles to luck. Nix, the small kindnesses that ruin you, NMY wife, your grandmother, is a good woman. I want you to know this with the weight of a fact, not the lightness of a compliment. She did not deserve any part of this story, and yet she lived inside it with more grace than I would have. She cooked for my mother when I worked late. She delivered jars of soup to neighbors who did not deserve soup. She stitched the lining of my winter coat without being asked. NSHE must have known. Perhaps not the details, not the address, not the boy's name, but she knew there was a room inside me where she did not live. Good women are radars. She never asked questions whose answers would injure her. That restraint is a kind of bravery too. One winter, the cruel one, the one when pipes broke like old bones, she found me standing at the window, watching nothing. She put her hand on my back and said, "I can share you with your work. I can share you with your worries. I cannot share you with a ghost." I said, "There is no ghost." She said, "Then why are you always speaking to the air?" And I promised to be more present. I kept the promise in the way a man keeps a promise he does not understand. with gestures, with flowers that died, with holidays that passed like trains. I grew into the kind of husband who is spoken of as reliable. Reliability is the dirtiest disguise I know. 10. A day of the photograph, and I kept one photograph. I should not have. I could not throw it away. Elena and Andrew in a park in late autumn. She wears a coat with a missing button. He wears a hat with a pom-pom too large for his head. They are both looking at something outside the frame with open mouths, mid-laugh. Perhaps a dog. Perhaps a clown. Perhaps nothing at all, just air that briefly became funny. And I hid the photograph in the back of a book I never loaned, a dull history of a war where the dates mattered more than the faces. Sometimes I would open the book and look for 3 breaths, then put the world back in order. And I imagine you have found that photograph by now, and I imagine you have felt the familiar pain of realizing that the face you thought you knew has other angles. Pain is a skill. I became fluent. NXI. The invitation I declined. When Andrew turned 7, there was a school concert. Children sang. Small hands kept time badly. A teacher wept because children's singing is a factory for tears. Through a chain of favors and lies, I obtained a paper ribbon that allowed me to enter the hall unnoticed. And I watched him sing a song about a river. He did not look like me. He did not look unlike me. He looked like a boy, singing bravely despite a missing front tooth. And afterward, the children rushed into the corridor to find their parents. He ran to Elena, holding the paper fish he had colored on stage. He said, "Did you see me?" He said, "I was not afraid." He said, "Can we have cake?" Elena said yes to everything. NHE looked over her shoulder and saw me. Children have a way of stopping time with their eyes. He stared as if he had solved a riddle. I looked away first. Later, I understood that this is the moment that built the rest of my life. I looked away first. I am sorry. NX2. What I wanted from you, and never asked, and I wanted to be forgiven without asking. That is the whole shape of my cowardice. I wanted to keep both lives intact by pretending one did not exist and the other was enough. But love is not arithmetic. You cannot subtract a son and keep the remainder happy. You cannot divide a heart and expect both halves to be on schedule. When I held you, my first grandchild from the life I did not betray, I felt a clean happiness that dirtied itself immediately by comparison. Your small hand closed around my thumb, and I remembered a different small hand, and a fountain and a toy soldier, and all the sentences I did not say. And I told myself that stability is love. Often it is. Sometimes it is camouflage.nx12. If there is a ledger, and I tried to pay what I owed, money hidden in pages, groceries delivered without a return address, a winter coat appearing when winter asked for one. When Andrew became a man, I found in the paper that he had apprenticed as a carpenter, then a foreman. He made things that stayed built. He married. He smiled in a photograph with a woman whose eyes promised him he had not been a mistake. In another picture, he held a child who looked at him the way Andrew had once looked at Elena. I have studied that picture like a map to a country that never issued me a visa. NDO. You think less of me? Do not answer. I have already decided you must. 14. Why, I am telling you now. And I am old, and mercy surprises me in small ways. A seat offered on a tram, a door held open by someone late for a train. I do not deserve the mercy of being remembered as good. I do not deserve the mercy of silence. I have asked silence to do too much work. And if you are reading this, it is because there is no longer a punishment that matters to me, only the wish that the truth be allowed to sit, like an honest guest, at our family table. There is a man named Andrew. He carries my blood the way a river carries a reflection, faithfully but not possessively. If you meet him, if life allows it, if kindness allows it, tell him that his father was a coward who loved him. Tell him his mother was the bravest person I ever knew. Tell him I watched him sing about a river and forgot the words to my own life. NIF, you decide never to tell anyone. I will not haunt you. I have haunted enough air. If you decide to tell everyone, I cannot object. I have objected to enough truth. Do as you must. Do as you can. Do as you wish to be. Fold this letter. Put it in a place where you keep things that cannot be thrown away. Then live your clean life, and when it becomes dirty, as all lives do, wash it with better choices than mine. And I have loved 2 women. I have loved 2 children. I have loved one city, flawed and stubborn, that kept all our secrets as poorly as a basket keeps water. Forgive me not. But know me, N postscript. A blue ribbon is inside the book with the photograph. It has kept its color longer than I expected. Ribbons are like promises. They look simple. They are a weave of many small strands. NIF, you tie it in your hair, no one will know what it means. If you tie it around your wrist, someone might ask. If they do, say, it is a reminder that we belong to what we choose, and also to what we refuse to choose. And I chose badly. When I chose well, it was too late. And still, in the sum of things, love survived us. And if you ever pass the fountain in the square and see a child searching the water for a toy, place it where he can find it on his own. Let him believe in luck. He will learn about the other things soon enough. N. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. A letter lay on the table in front of me, its creased paper catching the weak morning light that filtered through the lace curtains. I had read it 3 times already, each time slower than the last, as if lingering on the words would make them reveal something more, some hidden line between the lines. NBUT, there was no mistaking it. My grandfather had lived another life, not just in his heart, but in the world, with another woman, another family. The man whose photograph sat on my grandmother's nightstand, the man described in our family stories as loyal and steady, had written this confession with his own hand. And I folded the letter back into its envelope and tied the faded blue ribbon. My hands trembled so much I nearly tore it. It felt heavier now, as if the words themselves carried weight. NFOR, a long time. I just sat there, staring at the wardrobe. It stood silent, its doors closed, its secrets spent. Or maybe not. Could there be more hidden in its dark depths? More letters? More photographs? I searched the wardrobe from top to bottom. Behind the shelf liners, under the drawers, I ran my fingers along every panel. Nothing. Only dust and the faint scent of cedar. It seemed the wardrobe had revealed all it was willing to give. An NDID she know? NTHAT was the question burning in me. Did my grandmother know? I tried to imagine her finding the letter, maybe years ago, reading the words in the same silence in which I now sat. Would she have torn it apart in anger? Or folded it gently, tied the ribbon again, and returned it to the wardrobe with deliberate care? NHER face floated before me, kind, soft, unyielding in its own quiet way. She had lived her life with patience and discipline, never speaking ill of my grandfather, never hinting at shadows. But sometimes silence itself is an answer. NHAD, she protected us from the truth? Or had she lived in denial? NTHE uncertainty was worse than the letter itself. NNTHE neighbors, next day I decided to test the waters. I visited some of the old neighbors who had known my grandparents for decades. And first was Mrs. Harrison, who lived across the hall. She was well into her 80s, with sharp eyes that still missed nothing. She welcomed me with tea and biscuits that tasted faintly of lemon and nostalgia. I still remember your grandfather, she said, stirring her cup slowly. He was a quiet man, always polite, always nodded when he passed, not like some of the others. And I hesitated, then asked, did he ever seem different? As if he was hiding something? NHER spoon froze mid-stir. For a moment, I thought she would scold me for suggesting such a thing. But instead, she sighed. And child, everyone hides something, even the quiet ones, especially the quiet ones. It wasn't an answer, but it was enough to unsettle me further. Later, I visited Mr. and Mrs. Coleman, who lived on the floor below. They were younger than my grandparents, but had often shared dinners and holidays with them. No, your grandfather, Mrs. Coleman said with a smile. Such a gentleman. Always brought flowers to your grandmother, even in winter. Do you remember? He used to whistle in the mornings. I could hear it through the pipes. A habit of his. And I nodded, though I had never heard it myself. NMR Coleman leaned forward, lowering his voice. But there was something. I don't know. Sometimes he would disappear for a few hours on Sundays. Said he was going for a walk, but I always wondered. He looked different when he came back. Lighter, as if he had been somewhere that truly belonged to him. NMY pulse quickened. Could those walks have been visits to Elena and Andrew? And I left their apartment with more questions than answers? A photograph. Tonight, I searched my grandmother's boxes again. In one, among faded photographs, I found an image that stopped me cold. It showed my grandfather as a young man, standing next to a woman with dark hair and a radiant smile. Her eyes sparkled even in black and white. She held a blue ribbon in her hand, and on the back, in faded ink, a single word, Elena NMY Breathcott. She was real. Not just a name in a letter, not just a shadow in his memory, but a woman of flesh and blood who had once stood beside him. I stared at her face, trying to read it, to imagine her voice, her laughter, her pain. What kind of woman was she to hold his love so deeply that it lasted a lifetime, even in silence? And I placed the photograph next to the letter. Together, they told a story my grandmother had never shared. Miss City as witness. Over the following week, I wandered the city, tracing the routes I thought he might have walked. Along the embankment, where couples still strolled hand in hand. Past the old bakery, still selling loaves wrapped in thin brown paper. Past the fountain in the square, where children tossed coins and wishes into the water. And I tried to see the city through his eyes, imagining him walking with Elena, laughing, stealing moments before the world forced them apart. And I wondered if Andrew, the son, had ever stood at this same fountain as a boy, searching for his reflection in the rippling water, as city was full of ghosts. No decision. More I searched, the more I knew I had to find them. Elena, if she was still alive. And Andrew, the son my grandfather had never claimed, NTHE letter, had pulled me into their story, and now I couldn't step back. It wasn't just curiosity, it was responsibility. This secret was no longer buried. It had risen, and it demanded recognition. NBUT with every step, doubt gnawed at me. What if my family never forgave me for uncovering this? What if my mother's image of her father shattered beyond repair? And I stood once more before the wardrobe, running my hand along its carved surface. It had given me the key to the past. Now it was up to me to decide whether to open the door to the present, and I knew, deep down, that I would. And Chapter 5. Tracing Elena. A photograph of Elena lay beside the letter on my table like a puzzle piece from another life. I kept returning to it, running my thumb over the glossy surface, as if touch alone might reveal more than the eye could see. The woman in the picture seemed alive still. Her smile unguarded, her hair caught by a gust of wind, her hand curled casually around the ribbon. NFOR days. I lived in two worlds. The practical one, where I still had to work, shop, and answer polite questions from relatives about how the sorting of things was going, and the hidden one, where every thought circled back to the secret family. And a letter had given me a name, Elena. And the hint of a son, Andrew. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start pulling threads. First clue's NMY search began in the most ordinary place, the city registry office, a drab building that smelled of ink, dust, and bureaucracy. I carried my grandmother's death certificate as an excuse for my visit, an air-tidying family records. While waiting, I watched the clerk behind the desk stamp forms with mechanical rhythm, each thud like a metronome. When my turn came, I leaned in and asked casually, "Do you by any chance have records from the 1950s? I'm looking into some old family connections. The name is Elena Coleman." A woman adjusted her glasses and frowned. "That's a common name," she said. "We would need more details," and I didn't have them. But I smiled politely, feigned ignorance, and requested a search anyway. She sighed, flipped through bound volumes, then disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she carried a file. "We do have one entry," she said reluctantly. "A birth record from 1953. Mother, Elena Coleman. Son, Andrew." NMY chest tightened. It was him. And a document didn't list a father. Only a blank space, a silence on paper. And I thanked her and copied down the address listed at the time. A street I barely knew, in an older part of the city. NNTHE Old Street, NTHAT evening. I walked there. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the cobblestones were slick under my shoes. The buildings leaned inward toward one another like old companions, their plaster peeling, balconies sagging with rust. Number 17. That was the house. A narrow doorway opened into a courtyard littered with bicycles and stray cats. Laundry hung from lines strung between windows. A sound of a radio drifted from somewhere above, and I stood there a long time, staring up at the cracked facade, imagining Elena carrying groceries through that archway, Andrew running across the courtyard with a wooden toy in hand. My grandfather had walked here too, maybe stood where I now stood, heart pounding, afraid to be seen. And I wanted to knock on doors, to ask questions, but I hesitated. These walls had held their secrets for decades. Barging in felt like trespassing. Instead, I spoke to an older woman who emerged with a bucket of water. "Excuse me," I said softly, "do you know if a family named Coleman ever lived here?" "Long ago." NSHE squinted at me, tilting her head. "Coleman? Yes. There was an Elena. Dark hair. Always polite. She lived on the second floor with her boy. That was years ago. Decades. What happened to them?" And a woman shrugged. "People come. People go. The boy grew up. They moved away, I think, after she fell ill. But where? I don't remember. Too long ago." NNHER words were vague, but they lit a fire in me. Elena was real, remembered, not just a figure in a letter. And Andrew, he had lived here, breathed this air, laughed in this courtyard. "Archives," and I returned to the registry office, this time more determined. The clerk recognized me and frowned, but I pressed. "Could you check later addresses? Marriage records? Anything for Andrew Coleman, born 1953? NSHE sighed but complied. The search took time. Hours of waiting, sipping bitter coffee from a vending machine, my nerves stretched thin. And at last she returned with another file. Marriage 1975. Coleman Andrew, spouse, Irene. Occupation carpenter. Address updated, moved to the Eastern District. There it was. Proof that he had grown up, found love, built a life. I scribbled down the details, my hand barely keeping pace with my racing thoughts. In reflections, NTHAT night, I lay awake in my grandmother's apartment, staring at the ceiling. The city outside was alive with distant traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, the murmur of neighbors through thin walls. And I thought about Andrew, a man who had grown up without knowing his father, who had perhaps wondered why there was no name in that blank space on his birth certificate. Did he ever suspect? Did Elena ever tell him the truth? And if not, what right did I have to bring it crashing into his life now? NBUT curiosity gnawed at me. Not the idle kind, but the kind that keeps you pacing, restless, until you act. And I thought of my grandfather's letter, his plea. If you meet him, tell him his father was a coward who loved him. NWA's it my duty now to carry those words? Or was it kinder to let sleeping ghosts remain undisturbed? A pull of the past. Next morning, I packed the letter and the photograph into a folder and set out for the Eastern District. I told myself I was only going to see the house, nothing more. Just a stain on the street where he had lived, to confirm with my own eyes that this hidden branch of our family tree had indeed existed. And a tram rattled and screeched as it carried me through the city. I watched buildings pass, the new glass facades in the center, then older blocks with soot-streaked walls, then industrial zones where smokestacks stabbed the sky, and finally the Eastern District. Rows of 5-story buildings, the kind built quickly and cheaply, their concrete gray but softened by trees that had grown tall over the decades. Children played football in the courtyards, their shouts echoing. Elderly men played chess at small tables, their faces lined with years. And I found the address. The building looked ordinary, almost anonymous. I stood there for a long time, folder clutched in my hand, my heart pounding. Somewhere behind one of those windows had lived Andrew, the son of my grandfather, the uncle I had never known. No choice? And I didn't knock. Not yet. Fear held me back. Fear of rejection, fear of the unknown, fear of what the truth might unleash. And instead, I walked slowly through the neighborhood, memorizing the streets, the shops, the park, where perhaps his children once played. I imagined him walking these same paths, carrying tools for work, holding his wife's hand, laughing with friends. NHE was not a shadow. He was real. And I was closer than ever. NBUT, the letter in my folder seemed to burn against my side, as if urging me forward. Pass had led me here. And I knew, with a certainty that frightened me, that I would not stop until I looked Andrew in the eye and told him who he truly was. Chapter 6. Meeting Andrew. Returned to the building just before dusk, when windows start to glow one by one, like constellations deciding whether to appear. The folder with the letter and photograph felt heavier than it should have. I stood beneath the entryway, listening to footsteps on the stairs, the clatter of dishes, a television somewhere reporting news I could not absorb. Just knock, I told myself. You came this far to knock. And inside, the hallway carried the familiar scent of concrete dust and boiled potatoes. An elevator didn't work. A handwritten sign said, soon. I climbed the stairs, counting the landings like a child learning numbers again. Second floor. Third. The door I had traced from the registry records had a small brass plate, not with a family name, only a number. A faded wreath hung crookedly above the peephole, and I raised my hand, hesitated, knocked, silence. Then the unmistakable shuffle of cautious steps, the tiny darkening circle of a pupil behind the peephole lens. The lock clicked once, twice. The chain remained. The door opened a cautious span. Man in his early 70s, maybe, looked out. Gray hair, cut short with indifference. A carpenter's hands. I recognized the thickness of the knuckles, the clean-shorn nails, the tiny nicks that never quite become scars. His eyes were the color of old oak. "In yes?" he said. "Good evening." I began, and felt my throat go dry. "My name is Anna. I believe we might be related. Do you?" His face did not change. "How related?" And I held up the folder like a passport. "This is going to sound strange. May I explain?" "I won't take long." NHE considered me, then angled the door wider and kept the chain on. "Explain from there." "My grandmother recently passed away," I said. "In her apartment, I found a hidden letter. It was written by my grandfather decades ago. He wrote about a woman named Elena and a son. Your name was Andrew." N.A. Chain made a small metallic sound, like a breath catching. His eyes moved to the folder. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man arriving at a station he always knew existed, but hoped the train might skip. "And my mother's name was Elena," he said. "And my name is Andrew." He did not open the door further. "But names are not proofs. People knock with stories when they want to sell something. And I'm not selling anything," I said quickly. I brought the letter. And a photograph. My fingers clumsy, I opened the folder, revealing the yellowed envelope with the faded blue ribbon and the black and white image of a young woman laughing into the wind, a little boy's knitted hat at the edge of the frame. NHE stared. The chain clicked loose. The door opened. "Come in," he said. "Take off your shoes, please. My wife hates grit on the floor." The apartment was small and orderly. A bookshelf held neat rows of manuals and a few novels with cracked spines. On the table stood a vase with 2 chrysanthemums that had outlived their pride. The window faced trees. The leaves whispered like a shy crowd. "Tea?" he asked, already reaching for a kettle. "Yes, thank you." NHE set cups on saucers with the carefulness of a man who trusts hands more than words. We sat. The folder lay between us like a third guest. "Show me," he said, and I slipped the letter from its envelope and gave it to him. He didn't touch the photograph yet. He read slowly, moving his lips without sound, pausing at lines that must have struck the same parts of him they had struck in me. Sometimes his eyes lifted to a point far beyond the wall. Once he smiled without humor. Once he exhaled sharply, a sound like a nail pulled from old wood. When he finished, he folded the paper along its ancient creases and placed it on the table as if it might break the table. He did not speak. The kettle clicked. He poured tea and added sugar to his cup without asking, then pushed the bowl toward me. "My mother never said his name," he said at last. "Not once. She would say, 'Your father,' like people say, 'the weather.' Something that exists but no one can accuse of cruelty because it belongs to everyone. He glanced at the letter. So he had a name and a pen and a talent for sentences. I don't know how to ask this kindly, I said, but did you ever suspect? I suspected everything, he said, with a wry tilt of his mouth. That he was a sailor, a soldier, a prince, a coward, a ghost. Children fill in blanks with myths. It's cheaper than the truth. He picked up the photograph now, turned it to the light. This was in autumn. I remember the coat with the missing button. She said we'd replace it when we had the time, which meant when we had the money. We had time often, money rarely. NHE set the photograph down gently and looked at me directly. You are his granddaughter. Yes. And you came to, what? Apologize for him? Claim me? Give me an inheritance of letters? I came to tell you, I said, because he asked. Because it felt wrong to let you never hear it. And because I think people deserve their whole names. NHE nodded once, neither accepting nor refusing. Whole names, he repeated, rolling the phrase like wood between palms. All right. NWE drank tea in politeness. Outside, a child shouted to another across the courtyard. The smell of someone's onion soup drifted in, and both of us smiled reflexively at the domesticity of it. My mother, he said finally, could build a life out of 2 coins and a promise. She never complained where I could hear it. She had a way of disagreeing with fate, as if it were a neighbor. Kindly, but firmly. Do not put your laundry there, fate. Do not smoke near the pram, fate. His eyes warmed. She laughed a lot. Even when there wasn't much to feed the laughter. Did she ever love someone else? I asked carefully, and she loved me, he said simply, and books, and the sound of rain on the windowsill. She had a ribbon, blue. When she was sentimental, she tied it around my wrist and said I was her festival. His thumb touched an invisible ribbon as he spoke. Then he tapped the letter with one finger. This man remembers a ribbon, so either he's a liar who pays close attention or he was there. He was there, I whispered. I know. He said it without rancor. He was there, on the far side of the street. He was there in the translucent days when we had oranges. He was there in the winter we didn't. I didn't see him. But absence leaves footprints if you learn to read them. NHE stood, walked to a cabinet, returned with a small box. From it he took a school program, browned at the edges, the title still legible. Songs of the River, Class 2BN, my concert, he said. She kept everything. I kept this after she died. He looked at me. There was a man in the corridor afterward, standing alone, wearing a coat too warm for the hall. He looked, not lost, unlocated. I was 7. 7-year-olds make things into omens and then into jokes. I asked my mother who he was. She said, a person who admires children who sing, and I said, he must admire me very much then. She kissed my hair and did not answer. An NY chest tightened. He wrote about that concert. I said softly, I thought he might. Andrew replied, some truths are cheap because they're obvious. Silence settled again. Not hostile, tired. We sat in it like people resting after moving furniture. I should be angry, he said after a while, almost puzzled. I had been angry at shadows most of my life. Angry is a warm coat. Today I feel not cold exactly, but undressed. He smiled at his own clumsiness. Do you understand? Yes, I said. I do. Your grandmother? He asked. Did she know? I don't know, I admitted. She never spoke of it. But she kept the letter hidden. Maybe she found it. Maybe she didn't. I wish I could ask. I wish she could answer without breaking. And your mother? His daughter? I haven't told her, I said. Not yet. NHE nodded, mouth tightening. Then you have arrived here carrying not just a letter, but a decision. He tapped the folder again. What you do next will hurt someone. Perhaps many someones. Perhaps also heal them. It is unfair that truth performs both surgeries. Footsteps approached in the hall. The door opened with the ease of a key that knows its home. A woman stepped in, a few years younger than Andrew, carrying a market bag and a small bouquet of dill. Nah, she said. surprised, then pleasantly neutral. "We have a guest. My wife, Irene," Andrew said, rising. "This is Anna. She is family." A word hung there like a bird uncertain of its landing. Irene's eyes flicked to the table, to the old paper, to the photograph, then back to Andrew. Something passed between them, a conversation already half had years ago, in other terms. "And I'll put the kettle on again," she said calmly and busied herself at the stove. After a moment, she laid a hand on Andrew's shoulder as she passed. The gesture was not a question, it was a shelter. And W.E. drank more tea. Irene spoke of small things. Tomatoes too dear this week. The neighbor's new dog that disliked elevators. When the small talk had set a soft perimeter around us, she said without looking at me, "Your mother must be kind." "She is," I said. "And your grandmother must have been brave," she added, glancing at the letter briefly. "One way or another." And I thought of that. Bravery in the shape of speech. Bravery in the shape of silence. "Yes," I said. "One way or another." Irene excused herself to the kitchen. Andrew watched the steam lift from his cup. "When my mother was sick," he said, voice low, "she asked me to promise one thing. Don't become bitter. Bitter men make bitter rooms," I promised. "I have kept the promise most days." He turned the photograph toward me again. "I never knew if knowing would help. Today I know. It helps and it hurts, like salt." NHE looked up. "What do you want from me, Anna? Tell me plainly." Anna had practiced answers on the tram, the way people rehearse arguments they'll never have. "None of them fit here. And I want to know you," I said. "To know the part of my family I was missing. To give you this letter and not hoard it like a relic. To say I'm sorry, though I know the apology is not mine to make. And to ask what you would like." NHE chuckled softly. "What I would like? A different century. Fewer walls. A father who could lift with both hands what he carried with one." He shook his head. "But today I would like to walk for a while with my head a little lighter. Perhaps we can try knowing. Carefully." "If you wish." "I do," I said. A doorbell rang. A bright, modern sound that felt almost impudent in the old apartment. Irene called from the kitchen, "That will be Olivia." And to me, over her shoulder, "Our daughter." A hall filled with the breeze of arrival. A woman in her 30s, with her father's eyes and her mother's smile, carrying a carton of eggs and gossip. She saw me and paused in the choreography of taking off her shoes. "No. Hello," she said, then kissed her parents in quick succession. "Who's this?" "This is Anna," Andrew said, standing. He looked at his daughter, then at me, as if measuring a bridge and its span. "She is family." Olivia's expression shifted through curiosity to acceptance to curiosity again. "Wonderful," she said, and meant it in that straightforward way people in good families do. "Stay for dinner, Anna. Papa makes excellent cutlets. He pretends it's my mother's recipe, but we all know he improved it." She winked at him. He pretended offense. Irene laughed. "Set 4 plates," she told Olivia and turned to me. "You will stay, won't you? Otherwise, we will talk about you all evening without the benefit of your corrections." And I stayed. We cooked around one another like people who had practiced longer than we had. Andrew chopped onions with economy of motion. I learned where they kept the bowls. Olivia told a story about a bus driver who applauded a passenger for returning a lost scarf. The room warmed. The ordinary is a generous host. And at the table, talk threaded back to the past and forward to small plans. No one mentioned the letter directly. It lay in the other room like a monument you can see from everywhere without naming. After the plates were cleared, Andrew rose and returned with the folder. He placed the letter and the photograph back inside, closed it, and slid it toward me. "Keep these," he said. "They're yours." I protested. "They belong to you." "They belong to no one," he said gently. "They belong to what happened." He tapped the folder. "You will need them when you speak to your mother." A pause. "If you decide to." And I swallowed. "I'm scared," I admitted, "of the breaking that might come." "Breaking is inevitable," he said. "But sometimes it breaks the shell, not the egg." NHE walked me to the door. Evening had gathered itself. The hallway was a corridor of quiet. I put on my shoes, clumsy in the narrow space. NHE opened the door, then stopped it with his palm and looked at me as if I were a measurement he wanted to get right. "One more thing," he said. "Tell your mother this from me if you tell her anything at all. None of this is her fault. Let the dead carry their own bags for once." "I will," I said, though I didn't yet know if I would tell her anything at all. NWE shook hands, and then, without planning it, we held on for a moment longer than strangers do. His grip was steady, warm, the grip of a man who has made things that stay built. "Good night, Anna," he said. "Good night, Uncle," I answered, surprised by my own tongue, surprised that the words slid into the air and did not fall. And on the street, the trees whispered again. The city, which had felt like a maze all week, offered me a path, and I walked toward the tram stop, thinking of shells and eggs, of rooms that grow bitter, of letters that ask to be read only when truth no longer matters, and yet manage to matter anyway. The folder under my arm no longer burned. It was simply heavy, like something honest. And at the corner, I turned back. A light in the third-floor window glowed, and a silhouette moved across it. A small, ordinary proof that inside a room, people were washing cups and making jokes and deciding to live. And I stepped onto the tram, and for the first time since I opened the wardrobe, I felt that what came next did not terrify me. It merely waited. Chapter 7. A Burden of Truth. The tram rattled me back across the city, but my mind was still at that kitchen table with the chrysanthemums and the cutlets. I carried the folder under my arm, and inside it, the letter and photograph pressed against me like a second pulse. And I had expected anger from Andrew, or resentment, or distance. Instead, I had found calm, weary acceptance. A man who had already lived through the worst of the secret and no longer needed to fight it. That calm unsettled me more than rage would have. Rage would have been simple, but calm left the responsibility in my hands. I was no longer a curious granddaughter piecing together fragments of family history. I was a messenger, carrying words from the dead to the living, words that could break hearts or set them free. Family dinner. A few days later, my mother invited me for dinner. The apartment was warm with the smell of roasted chicken and dill, familiar comforts. She greeted me with her usual brisk affection, pressing a kiss to my cheek, asking if I was eating properly, if I was sleeping well in grandmother's apartment. And I answered half-truths. Yes, I was eating. No, I wasn't sleeping. And at the table, she talked about work, about a neighbor's new dog, about the price of apples at the market. Ordinary talk, safe talk. I watched her hands as she carved the chicken, steady and practiced. The thought burned in me. These hands had once been held by a father she believed belonged only to her. NHOW, could I tell her? How could I place the letter before her? Show her the words that proved her childhood had been a half-truth. Several times I opened my mouth to begin. "Mama, I need to tell you something." But the words stuck, thick in my throat. Instead, I asked for more potatoes. I nodded at her stories. I smiled at the right moments. NSHE didn't notice. Or maybe she did, and chose silence as her shield. Rehearsals NTHAT night, back in my grandmother's apartment. I sat at the kitchen table and rehearsed. And I said aloud, "Mama, I found a letter from Papa." He had another son. And it sounded brutal, like striking glass with a hammer. And I tried again. "Mama, there's something you don't know. Or maybe you do. About Papa. NTOO, vague." Too cruel in its suspense. Another attempt. "Mama, Papa loved another woman before he married you. They had a child together. His name is Andrew. He's alive." This sounded like a report, not a confession. And each version collapsed under its own weight. And I pressed my palms to my eyes and whispered, "How do you break a truth without breaking a person?" And an apartment gave no answer. And ghost conversations. And I began to imagine the conversation as if my grandmother were still alive. I pictured her at the head of the table, her teacup steaming, her eyes calm. "What should I do, Baba?" I whispered. Should I tell her? And in my mind, she stirred her tea slowly, the spoon clinking. "Child, truth is like salt. A little can heal. Too much can wound. You must decide how much your mother can bear. But if I hide it, I betray him. I argued. If you reveal it, you may betray her. My imagined grandmother answered, secrets always betray someone. That is their nature. I wanted her real voice, her real guidance. Instead, I had only my own doubts, wearing her face. N. A folder's weight. I carried the folder everywhere, to the market, to the tram, even to bed. It became a companion, a burden, a reminder. Sometimes I wanted to burn it, to watch the words turn to ash so that no decision would be left to me. But then I imagined Andrew's face, his voice saying, "What you do next will hurt someone, perhaps also heal them." And a photograph inside showed Elena laughing, her son's hat in the corner of the frame. That laughter deserved acknowledgement, not flames. NSOI kept it. And with each day, the folder grew heavier. NS small signs. One afternoon, I visited my mother again. She was sewing a button on a shirt, her eyes focused, her hands steady. "You know," she said suddenly, without looking up, "Papa sometimes disappeared for hours when I was little. Mama always said he went walking. I used to imagine he was a spy, or maybe a magician. Isn't that silly?" NMY heart stopped. Was this her way of telling me she suspected? That she knew more than she admitted? I wanted to seize that opening, to say, "Mama, you were right. He did disappear, and this is where he went." But I swallowed the words. I only smiled and said, "Children always make up stories." NSHE nodded, satisfied, and returned to her stitching. A silence between us grew thick again. In a mirror, NTHAT evening. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. My face seemed older, drawn, as if carrying two families instead of one. "Who are you now?" I asked my reflection. The granddaughter who guards her family's peace? Or the truth-teller who risks destroying it? In a mirror gave no answer, only reflected the lines of worry deepening around my mouth. A dream. In TH18 night, I dreamed of the wardrobe. Its doors creaked open by themselves, and inside, instead of clothes, there were letters, thousands of them, fluttering like wings. Each one bore my grandfather's handwriting, each confessing a different truth, and I tried to catch them, but they dissolved into dust in my hands. I woke with my palms empty, the weight of ash imagined, and a decision looms days past, each one a battle between silence and speech. My mother called, inviting me to lunch, to go shopping, to help her with chores. Each time, I thought, this is the moment. I will tell her now. And each time, I didn't, and a burden grew heavier. It was no longer just a secret. It was a choice that demanded to be made, and I knew the day would come, soon, when silence would no longer be possible. Chapter 8. A silent choice. Days after my second dinner with my mother felt like walking along a high wire. Every phone call, every casual invitation, every shared meal, each one seemed like a chance for the truth to escape my lips. NBUT, it never did. And instead, I carried it silently, tucked in the folder, tucked deeper in my chest. A secret shared with the dead, and now with Andrew. And I began to realize. Silence, too, is a choice, in a moment almost taken. One Sunday, my mother and I sat on the balcony, the city buzzing softly below us. She poured tea into the same porcelain cups my grandmother had always used, their gold rims chipped but still elegant. NSHE sighed, watching pigeons circle the roofline. "Sometimes I wonder what I never knew about Papa," she said. "He was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. I wish I'd asked him more." Words were an opening. A door cracked just enough for me to push through. My throat tightened. The letter burned in my memory. I nearly told her. My lips parted. NBUT. Then she smiled faintly. A childlike smile. Still, I always felt safe with him. That's what matters, isn't it? Safety. Stability. I looked at her. At the lines around her eyes. At the warmth of her hands resting on the teacup. If I spoke, that safety would shatter forever. NSOI swallowed the truth and instead said, "Yes, Mama. That's what matters." NA door closed again. NA weight of silence. NTHAT evening. Back in my grandmother's apartment, I placed the folder in the wardrobe in the same corner where I had found it. I pressed the panel back into place. A wardrobe seemed to sigh, as though relieved to reclaim its secret. And I stood there for a long time, my hand resting on the carved wood. The truth was still here, preserved. But it no longer demanded to be shouted into the world. It could wait until the right moment, or perhaps forever. And I thought of Andrew's words. Breaking is inevitable. But sometimes it breaks the shell, not the egg. Perhaps silence was a kind of shell. Perhaps my mother's peace was the egg. A visit. A week later, I visited Andrew again. He welcomed me with the same calm, his wife smiling warmly, his daughter offering me coffee as if I had always belonged. NWE didn't speak of the letter. We spoke of books, of food, of weather, ordinary things that weave extraordinary bonds. And at one point, Andrew looked at me across the table and said quietly, "You don't have to tell her yet. Or ever. You've told me. That is enough." And I nodded, grateful for his permission, though I knew he didn't truly need to grant it. And reflection. Late that night, walking home, I thought of my grandfather, of his divided heart, his cowardice, his love, of Elena's laughter, frozen in a photograph, of my grandmother's silence, dignified or deliberate, I would never know. I realized that families are never made of one truth. They are mosaics of truths and half-truths, of silences and confessions, of choices made and choices avoided, and a letter had given me knowledge. But wisdom, perhaps, was knowing when not to use it, midst and final ending. Sometimes in the quiet hours before sleep, I imagine both versions of the future. And in one, I sit with my mother and unfold the letter, watch her face crumble, hear her questions spill. Pain floods the room, but so does a kind of release. In the other, I never speak. I keep the secret, guard her peace, carry the weight myself. She lives the rest of her life untouched by betrayal. And I don't know yet which will be true. NBUT for now, I have chosen silence. Not because I am afraid, though fear is part of it, but because silence feels, for this moment, like love. And then maybe one day, when the time is right, the truth will speak itself. Until then, the wardrobe stands closed, the letter sleeps inside, and life continues. Messy, imperfect, beautiful, haunted by secrets, and sustained by love. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and help us create more stories like this. With your support, more secrets will be uncovered, more voices will be heard, and more untold lives will come alive.